Hey guys, this is Cully from Chronology Gaming.
Okay, this is Talk to Thorin, and my guest for this episode is Metuz of Room on Fire. So, the place I want to start, Metuz, is this. Where do you see yourself in the casting hierarchy industry right now? Who is Metuz? Where are you?
Man, starting with a difficult one. I would say that if you consider the tier 1 casters in CSGO to be the top 3 duos, so those 6 casters that everyone knows and loves, and that by that I mean just pure casters. I'm not talking about likes of Moses, who definitely could be a tier 1 caster, but I view him as kind of a jack of all trades in the sense he can do a bit of everything. He's on the desk. I think he's even hosting right now for EPL as well, the online stuff on YouTube. So I kind of view myself as below the top tier, as I haven't had the level of experience or the top tier events that a lot of the other casters have. To be honest, I've only had Malmo last year, which obviously we were working together at. Other than that, I haven't done any top tier events. So I'd say I'm more like tier 2 right now. If I was given more chance, I do feel I could break into the top, but obviously not having a duo is certainly hurting in that respect. But I'd say tier 2 is around fair for where I am right now in CSGO.
Okay, so one of the things about the timing of when your career started to take off in terms of CSGO casting is I feel like you were really unfortunate because almost exactly the time you were starting to get in a position where they would have brought you to a big event, and then the idea was, before the end of 2015, what they used to do was, sure, these duos existed to some degree, but they didn't always cast together. Actually, certain event organizers, ESL were quite famous for this. They wanted some say in who was casting a game, and sometimes they'd mix up the duos and they'd try and bring in, someone from their company to work with someone. And so there was a lot more kind of what I'd call cross-pollination between people. And so that's actually fantastic if you're a guy who's coming up, because if you get to do a game with Anders and then you do a game with Sembler later and you do a game with someone else, their name will bring people in, and then people will kind of get a chance to see what you're like with someone who's also a veteran pro, someone who's done a lot of casts. So it's a really good way, as we saw with people actually, I think that's part of, from those events, I think that's how Pansy kind of turned her rep around and people like her a lot more now. It's a good way to kind of get not only a good shot at it because you're getting a good partner for the game, but also get a little bit of extra shine where if you were in a pure casting duo but a lower one, it wouldn't be as good. So unfortunately, the timing of when you came in was when literally behind the scenes, the duos had all gone. I mean, at the time, it wasn't really Bardolph and DDK. It was the other duos. Okay, they'd gone to the tournament organizers, and in a move that was very intelligent for their careers, they said, we want to be these duos. We want to do games together. We want to kind of build our own little brand in that way. And you can see it's only made them better, not just in terms of business, but obviously they've got amazing synergy now that you don't get in some other games. And Monte Cristo pointed this out in his video. But I feel like you're one of the people who might have been a victim of that. If things had been the old approach, it might have helped, do you think? What do you think?
I think there's definitely a lot of truth to that. I worked actually from CSGO casting perspective since beta. I did a lot of very low tier events, and at the same time I was kind of casting League of Legends as well. I got pretty far in that. I actually had an interview with Riot at one stage, which I ended up dropping out of because I just lost my love for League of Legends at that stage.
Plus, when you were holding those 2 cans, the meter was just all over the place, wasn't it? So, anyway, keep going. Hold.
Reference game on point. But yeah, basically, I started from CS:GO beta, and I wasn't really getting anywhere. And yeah, I think there's definitely an element of truth to that. I'm also in a position now where I'm kind of in that older frame of mind in terms of I get passed around a lot when it's in terms of casting. I know I'm one of the last names on the sheet, and so I've worked with pretty much every single top tier caster, tier 2 caster, a lot of tier 3 casters as well at events. Especially in the DreamHack Open events, I'm kind of working with a different person almost each time, which is great in some respects because it allows you to branch out and get more experiences casting with different people, what makes them tick, because that's something I'm very interested in when I'm working with someone, is sort of their speech patterns, their tonal shifts, their body language, things like that. And you absorb certain things from people. But on the downside of that, as you say, absolutely, it stopped me from getting a duo. It stopped me from getting to more top tier events, which... No, I try not to look at that as necessarily a really negative thing. And I try and look at it more as it allowed me to go on a different route and try and grind a little bit more with lower tier events and lower tier casters. And I think that gave me a lot of advantages and positives, actually, than if I'd just gone to the top level to start off with. It gave me more of an appreciation, for example, when I do a top sort of event and I do a bigger event than maybe if I'd just gone in straight away.
When you do casting, and as you say, you're doing like almost a different person every game as your partner, and sometimes it'll be people you've never worked with, and maybe people who, they're quite inexperienced. I know actually one of the reasons, as well as the positive ends of building their brands and synergy, as to why the top casters wanted to have duos, is some of them were guys who actually, believe it or not, despite what veterans they are and what pros they are, some of them would get thrown off if they were given someone where they didn't decide they didn't like have a say in the casting duo, or it's someone where they felt like it wasn't the right chemistry. Some of them would get tilted if they did these games, and they would be like, oh, like I felt like the cast was shit because maybe I was like trying to do this to like cover this guy's weakness, or I couldn't figure out how to sometimes it's as simple as like the other person doesn't stop when you think they're going to stop, or they don't talk when you think they're going to stop, like simple things that you figure out after years together. Has it been a challenge in that sense, casting with pretty much everyone?
It has been a challenge, but I think it's been very rewarding for the reasons that you actually mentioned. And this goes back to previous games, like I casted Call of Duty, League of Legends. I've done earlier iterations of CS, but never really any like events or anything like that. So kind of the whole time I've been casting, that's very much been how I've been filled in with different people, not really having too much choice on the matter. Some of them have been train wrecks, absolutely, but I feel like I'm in a position now where I can pick up very quickly on somebody's quirks and what somebody kind of wants from the cast. I'm a firm believer as well that the cast is only as good as your weakest point. You could have one amazing caster and one very inexperienced trash tier caster, and the cast overall, half of the time people are going to be loving it because the solid casters just nailing it, and then half the time they're going to be hating it. So what I would try and do in that kind of a scenario is actually focus on the strengths of my co-caster, even if it weakens me, making the overall cast better as a result. And that's sort of my philosophy when it comes to working with people that maybe are inexperienced, or maybe I don't have as much experience with. But yeah, for sure, it has sometimes hurt when I go to an event and I'm casting with somebody that I've never worked with before. Sometimes it takes a little while to get used to them. Sometimes it takes a little while to get a really solid cast out of that. But it's just part of the job, honestly. That's the way I look at it. Just get my head down and work through it. I get to do what I love for a living. If there's a couple negatives around that, then so be it. I just don't really look into it that much.
So what was the philosophy then of being in Room on Fire and going kind of generally the freelance route? Because actually, as I kind of alluded to before, a way to kind of short circuit the whole duo thing is you join a big company and become one of their casters, because that way they can push you. They can almost make it kind of like part of the deal that like, okay, we bring this guy to events as well, and we can put him on like, let's say a big quarterfinal or something. Was the temptation there to do that?
There was a temptation. I had a couple of sort of half offers. Nothing was really concrete or guaranteed. But my thought process is that obviously I'm in a position now in my life where at home I have commitments here, where I can't really just move across to Germany, for example. If it was for ESL, I can't really just up route and just leave. And so I like the freelancing route a lot more. Plus, Room on Fire is just filled to the brim of like crazy talented people, and of course that can't hurt my brand being associated with them. And the fact that they will actively go out and look for events for me is certainly not something that hurts. They've been great, honestly, especially for my stream. They've really boosted the stream viewers up significantly. So it is one of those kind of scenarios. The opportunity arose. I knew about it actually quite a while before. I think it was Malmo when they first sort of offered that to me, or they first brought it up.
Okay.
And it wasn't until summer, I think, before contracts were signed and the announcement was made a little bit later on. So I knew for quite a while, obviously kept it to myself. But it was an opportunity, I think, that was too good to pass up. And if things don't work out in the future, I'm not like locked in forever. I can always step back and maybe pursue a different route instead. But it seemed like the right decision at that time.
So because the top end of the casting hierarchy has, formed into these duos, and they very much are kind of linked together in that sense. And if anything, it's only friction between the duos as to who people like and who's going to get the final and stuff. It's never really the idea that you never hear even anything behind the scenes of like one of the duos might split up and then take some. It's not like teams in that sense. They're really pretty much stuck. It does put everyone else who's a caster into the same framework of like, well, oh, you need a duo, and oh, who are you going to get? Or are you working to get someone? Like, has it ever actually been close to happening that people were really going to go all in and be a duo with you? Has it ever got beyond just spitballing and coming up with ideas?
I don't think it's ever got to a point where I thought it was going to happen. The closest I would say was probably with Launders. We worked a couple of events together. We did DreamHack Summer together and another, I think it was Tour as well, earlier in last year. But he ended up getting picked up by Yahoo, and that obviously threw a spanner in the works. And The other thing as well with duoing, an aspect that a lot of people fail to realize is that you have to get hired for the same events. Like if I'm one of the last names on the sheet and this other caster is in the same position to me, the chances of us getting hired to the same event are very small, especially if one's from NA and one's from Europe, because of their budget things come in, travel costs, all these kind of variables on top of it. So for me and Launders to get hired to the same event actually was really difficult. We tried to push to another few events, didn't happen, and so it just kind of naturally fell down. Obviously, I worked with Moses at Malmo, which for a little period of time I thought may be a possibility, but then E-League, of course, Moses is going to take that. And now Dust is someone else that I've toyed around with the idea. Vendetta is another guy that I've had the idea of working with, but I think those two are actually more suited towards the desk necessarily than casting. I definitely think they could cast and be very solid, but I think their strengths lay on the desk. So it's just been one of those kind of scenarios. It's very frustrating at times, but it's just the nature of the business. You've got to, I suppose, play to my strengths. That a lot of events, especially DreamHack, have even said this, that they view me as someone that can fit with anybody, and therefore I'm very easy to hire because, well, you have chemistry with everyone, so we know the cast is going to be decent at the very least.
Is it something, though, that you look to the future and you feel like at some point you have to kind of figure someone out who can go all in with you, and the idea is, you'll grind and maybe you'll sign with one league and you'll be the main duo for that? Is it something that's like is that the trajectory, or can you stay as you are now?
I think if I'm being completely honest with myself, a duo needs to be the way forward if I want to crack the top tier. The simple fact of the matter is that I've been working this last year, well, more than a year, doing solo stuff and trying to get by as effectively a solo caster that can work with a lot of different people. And although it's working well in the sense I'm getting events, I'm able to sustain a living from this, if I have the ambition, which I do, and any caster that's worth anything will tell you the same, they want to go as far as possible, they have that drive and that passion for casting, then I think, a duo is necessary, because events, especially the top tier events, typically hire in duos. They will go for one or two of the top guys and then maybe fall back. That's how I got put into Malmo, because I ended up working with Moses. Yeah. So I think duo is definitely the way to go. For the time being, though, the events that I have lined up are going to be more of what I've been doing this last year, which is effectively going by myself, being, matched with people, different people for different events. And then hopefully on the horizon, more top tier events will come, and that's where maybe I can work a duo out. But for right now, as it stands, I don't really have anyone that the duo is really locking in with. I have a couple of ideas, as I said before, Vendetta and Dust, but we'll just have to wait and see. It's about getting to the same events.
Now, this might sound a bit macabre, like why are you going down this route, Thorin? But okay, I have a principle in Counter-Strike, Metuz, where I always say on my talk shows, like off the top of my head, if I had to like gauge roughly how long top teams go without a roster move, it's about 9 months, And the point I'm making is, unless you're some magical roster that just never stops winning or never has that bad a spurt that you think about changing someone, inevitably it happens. Like, these things are going to happen. And I know in the moment people don't want to believe it, and they want to believe they'll be with that player forever and the team will stay together. The point is, you have to have a second part of your brain that's also thinking like long term, like, what if this guy was to leave, who else would I get, or where would I go in this direction, or what if I'm the one that gets left behind, and the other person goes somewhere else. If you don't do that, then you're just going to essentially allow yourself to constantly get surprised and shocked by kind of the getting tossed to and fro on the waves of life, So even though right now everyone still thinks, oh, these duos will be together forever, and oh, of course they are like household names and all the rest of it. Some of these duos weren't even around 2 years ago, or they were just forming 2 years ago, or some of them, in 2 years, 3 years, maybe a new game comes out and one of them wants to go try that, or maybe one of them just, the obvious horrible ones, maybe one of them just dies. I've got a few of them on my death pool for different reasons. Extracurricular activities, just being train wrecks as humans. There's different ways, Metuz, I'm pointing out, that people can drop out of the race. And if someone drops out of the race and someone else is a top caster and they want to stay in CSGO, you're right there. What do you think? Would you ever... Is there anything you've ever thought about? Like, one day maybe I can just join with another established person and get up the chain that way?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons, going back to a previous point about working with a lot of the different talent in CS, where that definitely benefits me, because if someone does drop out, or worst case scenario, then I've already worked with them. I already have a working relationship. Like, for example, I worked with Anders at Bucharest last year for DreamHack. I think that went pretty solidly. I worked with Semler at DreamHack Winter. I've worked with Henry G at Leipzig last year. I've worked with Sadakist, although I think I only casted one game at DreamHack Open Stockholm for the Cluj Poker qualifiers way back when. So I do have a relationship, a working relationship with these guys. And I think, obviously, I don't know what their thoughts on this are. I'm sure the thought hasn't really crossed their head too much as to, like, if my co-caster dropped out, who would I pick up? I think
I'll talk a lot of shit to them. I'll tell them, like, that guy, it's not reliable, and plus, he's off the rails, isn't he? So, have you heard about that Metuz guy? I'll put the word in, okay? So you don't worry about that.
Okay, cheers. I appreciate that, Duncan. So, yeah, I think if one of the casters dropped out, there'd be a chance. But there could, at that point, as you said, with the ever-evolving dynamic of CS talent, there could be another caster like an analyst or a color caster that comes up that they'd rather work with as well. So there's different variables at play there. But absolutely, if someone dropped out the top 6, I would love to join in, because all those casters in the top 6, I think, are phenomenal talents. I don't think there's any weak links. They're all different flavors. They'll bring something different to the table.
So you also just touched there on something that is another obvious potential solution one day, which is that actually, in my opinion, the easiest role to fill in terms of casting is the color commentary position, because there are so many intelligent players. There's so many people who are on the desk that I work with right now who could, they have done casting, or tomorrow they could fit into that, or they could go all in on that. If they decided for whatever reason they want to change the pace, for sure they could do that. Funnily enough, you can also go the other way. I know, for example, at one point in time, Sadakist was thinking maybe I'd just become a desk host. These things, there's people here who can change up their roles. So there's also been a bunch of players, some of them who are like in-game leader types or coach types, who were obvious fits to be a color caster. Now, I've noticed one of the problems, though, is we have a hard enough time getting them on the analysis desk, because a lot of them do like 2 events and then they just quit because it's too hard, or they get a coaching offer again, or they just think maybe that wasn't the right route for me. Is this something that you're also thinking of down the road? Like maybe a player retires, or there's just someone who decides casting's for me?
Yeah, that is also definitely a possibility. I originally, when Sponge, strangely enough, said that he was taking a back seat before, I think he went to ESL and became sort of a desk, I was very much interested in the idea of working with him as well. I think Chad could be amazing. He's already incredibly good on the desk, but I could actually see him being a really solid caster too if he wanted to put the time and the effort in. So yeah, I think there's definitely a bunch of players out there. Obviously, Sean Gers at one point worked with Pansy and was an absolute hit. People loved his casting style, thought they were a great duo. The likes of Hiko, maybe, obviously he just took a back step from Optic. Maybe in the future, if he stops playing, he could think about taking a position in casting. I'm not sure. Obviously, this is all speculation.
Sure, yeah.
But that's sort of the point, that there are so many ex-pros or potential ex-pros that could fit in, that have a very good mind for the game, that can speak as well fluently without stuttering or having issues conveying their message. And that's something a lot of people that aren't in casting may not realize, that it's all well and good having all this information in your head, but how do you convey that to the public? How do you convey that via speech? So you can have all this great stuff in your head, but not be able to get a word of it out there, or at least in the way that people will understand. So yeah, there are a bunch of pros right now that I think if they quit, they'd almost have a guaranteed job waiting for them. Dazed is another guy, works very well with Blue. That's a really solid duo as well. So absolutely, I think that's definitely one to watch out for. There could be a pro player that joins the ranks of the CS talent.
So another thing that I kind of alluded to when I was talking about how like things can change for even the top casters is that in the moment, it seems like everything's pretty sturdy, everything's pretty set, like who the number 1 duo is and then who's number 2 and then where the hierarchy all shakes out. But the whole point is the hierarchy has continually changed over the last 4 years of Counter-Strike. Like, I bet if you go back to end of 2015 and you say to Henry and Sadakist, like, can you ever be the number 1 duo in CSGO? They would probably be like, okay, maybe we could do it in terms of like technical ability, or maybe we could actually, on paper be better. But how are we ever going to overcome a brand like that? How are we ever going to overcome the most popular, the most well-loved casters? And the point is, this dynamic does change though. It doesn't change instantly, but it's kind of like you can see it coming a while away. So for example, a famous thing I've noticed with the established duos is the reason why they're all getting their turn to be the most loved by the community is when you're the established duo, you go through a sort of period where people like you and then they love you and then they love you the most, and then they start to that starts to fade a little bit, and then if there's the novelty of the newer duo who they haven't heard as much, they start to think, oh, maybe I want that instead. Maybe that's who my favorite are now. Maybe that person should do the final, So are you kind of cognizant of this, like that it won't necessarily, like it is possible to still move up, right? It's not like they're literally, you've got you locked out of the scene.
Oh, absolutely, and everyone at the top level as well. And this has been said so many times, but it is the absolute truth. CS:GO is, although we're rivals in terms of commentators, although I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a rival to the top tier, but a lot of their rivals amongst themselves, still very friendly. There's still a friendly vibe and atmosphere at events. There's not that much friction. Obviously, tempers rise and things happen. It's a stressful environment at the best of times, but they absolutely do want to help each other. Like Sembler is one of the guys that really pushed me to getting more top tier events and to start to get hired by more events. Without Sembler, I don't think I'd be here right now. And he had no reason to do that other than just seeing someone he thought was a decent caster that could potentially succeed. So yeah, absolutely, there is every chance that things change around at the top. I think the community can sometimes be very fickle. It was strange to me to see some hate threads on Anders in particular, because the guy has just put so much time and effort into this game, and I think he's incredibly good at what he does. That it was odd to see some people making some pretty rough comments throwing his way. Same for Semler. So yeah, everything can change. Everything can change for me as well. It can be frustrating. It can sometimes feel like you're wading through sort of sand and you can't really get any momentum, and it's quite difficult to put one step forward. I mean, this year's been quite slow for me. I've just done Leipzig and the B stream for Katowice, but there hasn't been that many events. That's the other thing to keep in mind, and that's something you always have to be very cognizant of. You know, just not having work for really like 3 or 4 months is bad, but then is that because there haven't been events, or is that because you just haven't been invited to events? That's when you have to start to worry. So yeah, I've just got to keep grinding. I've just got to keep going forward, and hopefully my technical ability can take me through, because I think one of my main weaknesses as a caster, it's not the technical side, it's sort of the external stuff like camera work. I'm not natural on camera. I never have been, and I've been working on that as much as I possibly can. I'm still a long way from where I want to be, and if I'm going to get high to the top tier events, then that's something I have to be much better at.
So when you said there, like, you know, you don't necessarily think of yourself as a rival to these guys, like, there's a degree to which, okay, I can think from the perspective of other people and I can try and imagine what it'd be like to be them. But there's also some level on which, whenever we're trying to imagine a scenario, we think of ourselves in that position. And so if I was ever in a position where there were people ahead of me, but I was working really hard and I developed my skills, I mean, I think you could probably guess this. I would be like, okay, you know, like, they've got the status right now. They earned it, all great, all good things. Like, I'm saying all the right things now. But I would also in my mind be like, fuck those guys. I'm gonna overtake them. I'm better than that guy. Like, I'm working harder than him. I can beat him. Maybe not today, but tomorrow, in the future. Do you have drive in this sense?
I do, but I'm also, as you know from spending time around me, we spent actually quite a bit of time at Gfinity when we went back. I'm quite a quiet, reserved, sort of introverted person, actually, away from the cameras and away from casting. And so, although I do have drive and I have a lot of ambition to one day cast at majors and potentially even playoffs and things of that nature, I suppose I don't really think of it in the sense of like, fuck those guys, I'm going to be better than them. Okay. It's more along the lines of, I want to improve my own skill and my own craft, as cliche and as cringy as that sounds, and to try and get to a point where I've earned my right to even be at the majors, at the playoffs, those kind of scenarios. So, as I said, I think my technical ability in terms of when I'm actually in the game and commentating on a game is solid. I don't think I'm that far away from the top tier casters in that respect. There's a lot of other things that I'm miles and miles behind that I'm aware of. And so camera's one of them, not having a duo is another. Sometimes I think I have an issue with game knowledge, or team knowledge, I should say, because I genuinely have an awful memory and I should always keep on top of that as much as possible. And these are just a few things. There's a bunch more things. But yeah, I think technical ability-wise, I could certainly be on par with them if I continue to get top-tier events and experience. But it never really crosses my mind of like being super cutthroat or ruthless in that way, because I just don't think it's in my nature.
Okay. So one of the issues you've also had, forgetting like the duo thing and the fact that you still, I mean, people forget this, but in esports, I always say you get hired for what you've done, not what you could do. So you really have to kind of prove it at each level. I mean, it's happened in my own career, you know. I didn't get better jobs because someone just plucked me out and were like, oh, you've got really talent. If I did a year or 2 years of stuff, someone who saw that, maybe a guy I don't even know is watching, that's the guy that'll hire you for the next job. So you got to really build it up, you know. And so in casting, famously, people always say you've got to grind. And this is one of the number one reasons I would put behind how Henry and Sado got to, in my opinion, the top at the moment, which is the difference is Anders and Semler, for their own reasons, couldn't grind to the same degree, and they were already at the top. And so these guys were like, okay, Maybe you're the most popular, maybe you're even better right now, but the one thing we can do is we can outwork you. We can do more events, we can do more online games. I mean, we're young, unencumbered guys, so we can just do every event in theory. Now, that's been an issue for you in the last 6 months or so, because you revealed you had some health issues that were preventing you from doing, say, like 3 events a month, or, you know, kind of the crazy caster schedules that you sometimes get. Is this still an issue going forwards? Is there a solution in sight?
It is still an issue. My health has improved. I've been working on a lot. I've lost weight, dropped the blood pressure, but it is still an ongoing problem. And I always knew that it wouldn't be an overnight fix, that it would take quite a while, a slow, gradual process. Because I've also, when I was in my early 20s, late teens, I had 2 or 3 pretty brutal back injuries, which are also... Obviously, back injuries are no fun, and you have to be very careful, especially when you're carrying a bunch of extra weight. So I always knew it would be a slow, gradual process. It is still an issue, not as much, but it's really the main issue now is more along the lines of traveling to a different continent. It's like going to NA, it's going to Asia, something like that. Okay. Flights that are over sort of like 8 or 9 hours are going to be particularly rough for me. But I am trying to force myself. For example, next month, there's a possibility of me doing 3 events. And so that's going to be, I suppose, the stress test to see if I can deal with it, see if my body can cope with that. I'm maybe doing an NA event, hasn't been locked in just yet. And so, again, that would be an indication to me and also my doctor who said, go for it, but be very careful as to whether that is something that I can do going forward. It is improving, but it's still a concern. And it's incredibly frustrating because not just in the sense that I haven't been able to do as many events as I'd like to, but the community sometimes has this weird notion in their mind that I just can't be asked. Like, I don't have the interest. Like, that Metuz guy expects everything and does fuck up. No, that's not what's happening, though. It's just not even close. And that can be really frustrating. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I've got to focus on doing what I can to improve my health. Because health is more important than everything else. If you don't have health, you don't have anything. Yeah. So that's ultimately my primary focus. But I can still do events, and that's ultimately what I'm going to try and do. I've also been doing a lot more online casts as a result of that, because obviously working from home is a lot more easy in that sense. And that's going to continue going through into the next couple of months. But that's also something as well, going full circle to the duo, that's also been an issue, that I couldn't really travel to NA to duo with somebody. It would have to be almost, as shitty as this sounds, not necessarily on my terms, but on EU soil. Otherwise, it wouldn't really work out, and that's definitely another reason why the duos haven't really flourished just yet.
Is that cliche of if you're casters, you got to grind those years, and that's the only way you get to the top? Is that the only approach? Like, would you have to get to a point where your health allows you to do sometimes 3 events a month, or do a massive online league where maybe you have to travel to a studio? Is that the route that you think you have to go?
I think so, unless something drastically changes in the scene, unless there is an equivalent to like E-League in London or something like that, where I can just live nearby and go there. I think that is ultimately what's going to have to happen if I want to get to the top tier. I can coast by now and stay roughly where I am by doing an event or 2 events per month at most. But if I ever have any ambition to go further than that, then yes, the grind has to come in. As you said, Henry G and Sadakist are almost the perfect examples of that. They have crazy talent. They have that natural ability, especially Matt. He is an unreal play-by-play caster. I've been saying that for the longest time. And they were always destined, I think, for great things. But they managed to propel themselves much quicker by just going on this mad grind for like a year, which I know would have took a toll on both of them, not just physically, but mentally as well. But that's what you do. You have to sacrifice in order to get to the top tier, and they absolutely deserve everything they've got as a result of that.
So you alluded to before, like you kind of hang your hat at the moment on technical ability, like you've improved in this area. And obviously, especially with some of the people you've been paired with, they're going to be covering the collar route most of the time, you know, especially if it's someone like Moses, obviously someone who's a long, long time in the game. But how do you actually view that going forward? Like, do you want to primarily be the play-by-play caster? Would you like to be in the Anderson Semler world where, you know, depending on which game it is, there's a bit of both going on and there's kind of wiggle room there? How do you see yourself in that respect?
That's a good question, because in my position, I have to constantly think of adapting my casting style to fit with someone new. You know, as we spoke about right at the beginning, working with a lot of different people, everyone has their different take on casting. I've worked with people that are pure play-by-play casters, and I've had to take more of a color role or more of a hybrid role. I think preferably where my main strength lays is primarily play-by-play, but I'm happy enough to go hybrid if the guy I'm working with or the girl I'm working with is really solid at play-by-play too. And then we can both sort of dip into analysis now and again. I think the absolute way that I won't go is color casting, because it just doesn't play to any of my strengths as a commentator. Like, I could maybe put a lot of time and effort into analysis, but it's not something that I naturally have a warmth or an interest in as much as play-by-play. I really enjoy the play-by-play aspect of commentating, and I have, going back however many years it's been now to like COD 2, COD 4 days. Yeah, I'm pretty open when it comes to potential duos and how it'll work, as long as the other person is willing to put the effort in too and give and take. I think that's the most important thing for me. It's like that mutual respect. Because I try and respect everyone that I meet to an extent. Like, if someone loses my respect, then fair enough. But if a duo comes in and kind of expects me to just bend over backwards to accommodate them, if it's a one-off, then fair enough. But if it's going to be a long-term thing, then that's not going to work.
Okay. So, at the moment, one of the problems with not being in a duo as well is, even at events you're at, it's not often you're going to get a semi-final. I mean, forget a final, because they literally, obviously, even though I notice every duo claims none of us ask for it, and, you know, we don't even have a say in it, magically you get it all though, don't you? It's weird how that all works. So we all know that just the hierarchy is it's not going to happen. So one of the big things that everyone complains about is how variable the match that you get can be, especially if it's a group stage match. You never know, even if it looks dynamite on paper, it's just going to be a complete stomp, and then sometimes the absolute trash game ends up being the really great one. So far, give us a couple of highlights. What have been some really good games that you've cast?
Oh man, I would say the match that I casted back at Leipzig with Henry, not only for the fact that I was working with Henry, who was an absolute dream to work with from my perspective, like he ticked all the boxes as a co-caster, but the Kia B clutch with a Deagle is one that will.
Oh, always... this is the 2016 one, yeah. This is when it was Dignitas and who was it? Virtus Pro or Luminosity or something? Who was it?
It may have been VP. As I said, my memory's shocking. But yeah, it was
the train game though, yeah.
Yeah, on train with a Deagle, and he picks up the clutch with it. And that, not only was that an amazing moment, because the game itself was actually really good. I remember throughout the game was amazing. But additionally, that's almost a clip that most people will quote to me. You know, it's kind of the one that most people know me for, I suppose, in Counter-Strike. So it was sort of multi-layered in that respect of being a pretty cool game. And then Malmo, I was casting with Moses again, a great co-caster to work with, and we were doing NIP versus, was it Godsent in the semi-finals?
Yeah.
It was an all-Swedish game. Yeah, it was semi-finals, biggest game I've ever casted. Crowd was unreal, like so raucous. I don't know if you remember, I was really sick then as well. I had like a crazy fever. But it was just such an experience, and not necessarily for the gameplay. I think it was more along the fact it was an all-Swedish affair in front of a Swedish crowd at the top event that I'd ever casted. And the CS definitely wasn't bad either. Godsent had a crazy run. No one expected them to really get anywhere in that event, and they went all the way through to the semis. So those two are the ones that stick out for me. But yeah, absolutely, there is an element of rolling the dice every time you go into a server. You don't know, even if a game should be a complete bloodbath. Sometimes best of ones throw up upsets, really close games. A lot of finals, obviously, famously have sucked and nothing's really happened in them. So even if you do get the finals, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's more prestige at that point than actual Counter-Strike ability on the server. It is a complete roll of the dice. But I think I've done 2 finals in the last year, and both of them have been at events where I suppose I was sort of like the most known caster there. So it's, when I'm working with more known casters, there's no chance of me getting through to the finals.
Okay, another concern for someone in your position as well is, like you say, if on the bigger events you're getting called like last, like you're filling the spot, the holes that they've got there, the big concern is that's okay if the climate is exactly how it is right now. But one thing that everyone is worried about, even some of the duos, is what happens if the scene shrinks. Like, what happens if we go from 3 online leagues to 2 online leagues? What happens if a big player comes in, for example? I mean, E-League did this vaguely last year, but it looks like they're not really like committing to doing it at the moment. What if someone comes in and they take up half the schedule or something, or they just say, oh, we're only going to use these casters, you know? Obviously, it's scarcity then. It limits it for everyone. How do you see the future going forwards in that respect? Like, I mean, at the moment, you get a lot of work from some of the smaller orgs, or the ones where the other people, either there's a tournament clash or they just don't want to travel as much. How do you see it working out in that respect? Like, is it a concern of yours that there might be less positions to work for? Or do you think actually, I mean, we see some events coming along now that, I mean, now PGL's got a major, maybe there's more tournament organizers. How do you see the current landscape for you?
It's very similar to how I feel with freelancing. It can be a very scary place to be at times when you're not being offered events and when there are question marks. The fact of the matter is there is a lot of very good casters in Counter-Strike. Like you can even go down into tier 3 casters and some of those are super good as well. So there's a saturation there, of course. And I think in one respect, how we touched on it was kind of unfortunate timing with when I started to break through as opposed to other duos. But it's also fortunate I did break through then, because if I was breaking through now, I think there'd be even less opportunities for me than there are currently. The whole thing with the skins, when CSGO Lounge kind of got closed down and a bunch of other things happened, that I know sent a few shockwaves through the community. And there were some talks about, does this mean certain events are going to close down? Is this going to make things more scarce? I was never really that worried about it. I thought it would impact the very low events more than anything else. But I suppose that's the last thing I can really go off. And it was worrying. Because if a few more events start pulling out, if a couple of organizers no longer do events, then what am I doing? If DreamHack stops doing events, I'm basically screwed, right? So that definitely is a concern in the back of my mind. And another reason why, going back to the health thing, it's so frustrating, because I want to grind as much as I can while there are events available, because if the events dry up, then I have no ability to grind anyway. So yeah, it's always in the back of my mind, trying to take as many events as I possibly can.
So when I pointed out the thing about like where people are in the hierarchy and then what they should do in 6 months' time, and then when you're getting a game, what your expectations are of the game, a lot of this might sound like you're going way too deep on the minutiae here. But the whole point is, because this is a caster's job and these are the variables, these are what people obsess over, and argue about and have conversations with each other about. So when it comes to games, and obviously, like we say, they can be very variable. Have you found a trend? Is there a team that when you cast, it either fits your casting style, or this team just in general throws up better games? Is there one that comes to mind that if you see this team and it says Metuz on the schedule, you're like, right, I've got a good one here?
VP are the team for me, because not only do I love watching VP because of the historical nature of the players, but they have such an intriguing game style too. And there's always that element of, are they going to show up? Are they going to be complete trash today? Are they going to just steam the roll through everybody? They're a team that, even if the game isn't particularly exciting, there will be really exciting moments in it. And this, I think, I did watch the interview you did with Sadakist as well, and he kind of went through that. It's not necessarily about the score, it's about the action. Yeah. And VP typically have, almost every map I've casted, they've had at least one or two moments where something crazy happened, or some huge play that just kind of flourished out of nowhere. They're always a team I love watching. Additionally, another team I really enjoy watching is Astralis. They're great for the same reasons. Also, on top of that, obviously, if they're playing, there's a certain level of expectancy, as they are the top tier team right now. And I love watching the likes of Kirby play. I've been a fan of his since I first saw him at Leipzig, and even before then as well. So I suppose these two teams are the ones that stand out for me. Lower tier, I suppose, maybe someone like a Heroic is quite interesting to watch. I've liked watching Balden, what he's been able to bring to the table. So yeah, I mean, there's quite a few teams that I really enjoy watching. Honestly, though, I don't necessarily get really happy or dismayed by what team I'm casting on the team sheet for the same reason we mentioned earlier. It's a roll of the dice. You could have two teams that on paper probably aren't that interesting. For example, I haven't even been very hidden about this. I really don't enjoy casting Flipside. They're an incredibly slow team. It seems they don't really adapt that much. Their T-sides at times are an absolute bore and a snooze fest. They're just not a fun team to cast, but some of the games I've casted from them have actually been super enjoyable, because both teams have kind of sucked in a way, as horrible as that sounds. And so it's been this absolute, gruel to the death between the two of them. So it doesn't necessarily matter, but I think VP stand out for me.
One of the other things that's been really weird about the last year or so is not only did the increasing size of CSGO mean, more investment, so you get teams that are lower down who are going all in, and, like in general, you've seen a lot more underdog teams come through the ranks. But at the moment, because we've had this ridiculous period where the last 3 months, like every big team roster move, in theory, is like a good move that upgrades on paper and is potentially making even better teams. In theory, you could have events now, if all the best teams are there, where there's no bad game on paper. So no matter who you are, it doesn't matter if the big dogs take the lion's share, as it were. There's plenty of good games lower down. It's not like back in the day where it's like this team is got no chance when they get to the LAN, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think CS:GO is almost as competitive as it's ever been right now. We have so many teams that, on paper, could upset, could take maps off each other. Obviously, G2 coming back in, Fnatic coming back in, VP, SK, Astralis. I mean, the list just goes on and on of 10, 15, maybe even 20 teams on their day that could potentially take maps off each other. So completely agree. Now we aren't in that same position as before where you'd have a group match where it was an absolute stomp and you're expecting like a 16-2, 16-3 scoreline. I think another aspect of that, though, is that going back to those kind of times we had maps like Nuke in there when it was super CT-sided. And we don't really have maps that are as one-sided anymore in the map pool, I would say. A lot more even-ish maps like Cobblestone, if you look at it. Like some teams even will wreck on T-side. Cash is another one. For a while was super T-sided. Before it was CT-sided, it's just back and forth. And I think that's another reason as well for the maps themselves that are offering much closer confrontations when it comes to the top sort of like 10 or 20 teams in the world.
Where, even though I've kind of set the theme throughout this interview that no one really knows, even in 6 months, what is going to happen in all regards. No one knows if they're going up, if they're going down. You only really find out after the fact. What is a reasonable dream for a year from now? Where could you be in a year, do you think?
Oh, man. I do often think that those terms at the start of the year, like, where do I want to be this time next year? I think for realistically, of let's say like the end of March in 2018, I would like to have casted at a major. Even if it's just group stage matches. I don't expect to do playoffs or any further than that. Just be involved at a major would be awesome. More top tier events is what I think is a realistic goal that I would like to strive towards. As I said, I've only done Malmo so far, and that seems not too many. Just the one event is pretty rough, and that was nearly a year ago. I mean, I know you have a much better memory than me. That was like March, April.
It was April, yeah.
Yeah, April last year. So I mean, we're coming up to Malmo again nearly. Obviously, this year it's in August. And so, yeah, I think more top tier events would be my goal, my drive. A major would be like the cherry on top. Maybe have a duo kind of in the works, or maybe even gone to a couple of events together and try to make that flourish. But as you say, I mean, there's so many unknown aspects of Counter-Strike in the top tier of casting and where things could go, that things could be drastically different this time next year to where they are right now. I mean, things could be completely different for all we know. But I think top tier events is my main goal.
Okay, so at the end of the interview, do you have anyone you want to thank or say hello to?
Well, thanks to you for getting me on. Cheers to 315 for having my back, and it's been a really enjoyable experience.
Hi, this is Natu, a guy who's way too old and way too long involved in this game, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.